Hello and welcome to another episode of the Busy Bee Podcast. This week I am joined by Cam, better known as That ADHD Guy or That Masculine Guy over on Instagram. Now, normally I would open up an episode with a guest talking about their social success, where Cam has over 60 million likes across platforms or over 500,000 followers over on TikTok, but today's episode is a little bit different. Cam is actually a creator that I have had challenges with in the past, and I've asked if it's okay that I say this. Our first ever interaction was because I was DMing him to tell him I thought his clickbaiting strategy was super harmful. What I expected in response was someone that was egotistical and argumentative, but I was actually met with an open mind. And so I really gained a lot of respect for him, even though I don't agree with a lot of his strategies. In the last month, I've made a significant shift online, and Cam was actually one of the first creators to reach out to me to give me praise and offer me encouragement with this shift I was making. And in the same time, Cam was making a shift on his platform to move away from ADHD content and more into the men's wellness space, which we talk more about in this episode. And so that intrigued me to learn a little bit more as to why he was making the shift at seemingly the same time I was and what was driving him to make that shift. But I want to make something very clear before this episode begins. No, I do not agree with a lot of how Cam shows up online. But what I can do is show up with an open mind and a willingness to learn and hear his perspective to gain a better understanding. And I suggest you maybe do the same when listening to this episode. Not necessarily to then agree with everything he's saying, but to just consider why he's saying it or where that's coming from. It's very easy to sit back and criticize someone, which Cam deals with a lot, but it's more powerful to show up with an open mind and a consideration as to why they're thinking that way. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this very different episode of the podcast. Enjoy. One of the things that I did want to talk about right away with you was about this shift that we're both seemingly making online. For myself, I've talked openly about the fact that I've cut down like 90% of my sponsorships and that I've shifted now to like full-time coaching, and I'm building a woman-run coaching business. And on the other side of things, you're kind of doing the same thing, but for men with like coaching and programs. And so I'm curious what caused that shift for you and what the background behind that is.
Just for me, I've kind of felt like what I was doing before was out of just alignment for me. And not that I still didn't want to help those people. I just felt like I had more of a high calling there. And I always kind of knew that I wanted to help men in some way, because I didn't really have a strong masculine, I grew up with my parents, but my dad wasn't a super strong masculine role model. And so I didn't really have anyone. And it wasn't until I was like 22 that I met my first best friend, who I would honestly have considered a really strong, father type role model who led me in that direction. And yeah, I, had got diagnosed at 12 with ADHD, and I grew up with that. And, when I started posting, I wasn't planning on really building a company. I was just working gardening, and I ended up just posting the videos, and it just came to fruition. But yeah, as of recent, just kind of felt a pull in, I guess, my own spiritual sense or higher self, and wanted to more lean in that direction and just kind of post what I felt was authentic and aligned with me. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I love that. And I want to ask too about the authenticity side of things, because that was a big thing for me as well, where I had to like check myself and be like, am I being authentic or am I doing this for other means? What does it mean to you to like be authentic online?
To be showing up in your day-to-day, like I can't lie, I'm not perfect either, just like everyone, and I have my moments, and I don't always show up perfectly. I struggle doing the inner work and facing reality for how it is. And so any time that I'm not showing up in my day, I find it extremely hard to show up online. And so I almost have and it's pretty often, to be honest, I'm constantly having identity crises within myself. Should I post this? But I didn't do that today. So is that who I am? And it's like, just because you miss one day, it's actually not that bad. It doesn't mean it's not who you are. And so I've kind of got that confliction in me constantly. And that's where I really struggle. But the authenticity, to really answer that, it just comes down to you practicing what you preach. Exactly.
I love that.
I try my best. Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really like that. And so, yeah, when I did make this shift online from like content creator to coach, because that's a very significant difference. And I had a ton of creators reaching out to me and asking me,
Yeah.
you know, to get on calls with them to talk about how I'm making that shift and like what that looks like and how I'm going to be maintaining things a little better, because a lot of people are feeling that burnout when it comes to like being online. Why do you think that so many creators are stuck in this like content machine with no real fulfillment or any sort of perspective on how to change that?
That's a really good question. Basically, why are creators stuck on the hamster wheel and
Yeah.
unfulfilled? I don't know. I think it's because a lot of people are. I mean, if I'm just going to be completely honest, like I think it's just because a lot of people at the end of the day, like are trying to escape the system whilst at the same time, like really help people. And it's hard because, you know, you want to have your own survival and stuff, but you also want to do good. So you can feel very conflicted, and, you know, like you see a video that's not doing well, and it's like, oh, am I going to make this sales from this video and this and that? And then there's a lot of questions that come up, and I think you get stuck in that perpetual state, like, oh, okay, is rent going to be good next week? Like, is the food going to be paid? And it's that constant shift between like, am I going to be able to support my living whilst also helping people and coming from an abundance state? And so it takes a while to, like, depending on what you do and what industry you're in, but it takes a while to leverage it and, you know, get your cash up so you're okay, so you can come from abundance and really show up online. And I think that's where most creators really struggle, because they don't know how to sell properly. They don't know how to jump on sales calls and sell people so they can work with them and support their living. And so they get stuck in that cycle of like putting out the content and trying to get more clients and this and that. And I've been there myself, like so many times. Do you feel the same way sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think before I made this shift, I had canceled all of my coaching. I was only content. I was only doing sponsorships, and a lot of creators are doing that. And I think a pain point for a lot of creators is not knowing what other options they have. And so for like us, we've both stepped away into this business of coaching and helping others and doing that. I think a lot of creators are kind of stuck in this, like, I make funny videos and that's it. And they don't know how to capitalize on that or do anything outside of the space. And that's definitely where I was stuck too. I was like, well, this is just what it is. I just make money from selling my soul online and talking about companies I don't care about. So I think a lot of people are stuck there.
Yeah, it's really hard. And if you haven't noticed in all the ADHD creators, like I think I did like one I've done some UGC, but I think I've done one sponsorship. And that was it. And it's just because I wasn't really willing to sell my soul in that aspect. And I've probably struggled a lot more with creators because, you know, I know how much they can charge per video. Like I know what it's worth, and you can get by and do quite well with that. But was I willing to wake up every single day knowing that like I'm just speaking bullshit and I think that hurts the most. And that's why I don't really like doing sponsorships, to be honest. And I think a lot of creators, they're unfulfilled because deep down they know that it's not the right decision. If it's absolutely in alignment with you and you feel like you would be doing a disservice to your audience by not selling them that product, that's a completely different story. But if it's like, I need to make $6,000 USD from a video, but it doesn't even align with me, but I need to support my living, it can become very conflicting because it's like you're in survival mode, but you're also like, oh, but this isn't right. Yeah. So I know that a lot of that probably resonates with a lot of creators because they don't know how to sell or get clients. And that's why it's a tough balance.
Oh, completely. That so resonates with me because that's exactly the struggle I was in, where I had a very large income from my sponsorships, but like, that doesn't mean shit if I don't feel fulfilled or if I don't feel good every day. Like I felt like crap. I was making the most money I've ever made in my entire life, but I felt the worst I ever felt my entire life. And so, I have like actively quartered my income, and my happiness is just like skyrocketed. I think a lot of people don't want to necessarily face that truth. It can be kind of scary.
I agree with that. And at the end of the day, you know, you can make 10 or 20 grand a month, or you can make $5,000 and be happy. The numbers don't really matter. And I think that the only way to actually understand that is you do have to get to that level, because it's like someone can tell you and explain it to you, but you'll never comprehend it unless you actually go through the physical experience yourself. And I think that's where you can begin to really then be like, okay, well, this isn't the path I want to take. Yeah, sure. You know, I'm going to have to, you know, change my style of living a little bit, but then you realize like, oh, I'm just doing dumb shit anyway, and like it doesn't really matter. So I think that that realization is good for most people, and it does take sometimes hitting rock bottom or going through a certain life altering experience to really realize that.
Yeah, shout out to Shroom. That did that for me.
True.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm very close to a lot of the ADHD creators, and a lot of them are struggling and not really sure of what to do or how to move or how to change. And I think it's bigger than just our space too. But that does bring up another question, being that, you know, I saw your video specifically about like, I'm moving away from the ADHD content and moving into like the men's wellness and mental health space. What was the reason for that specific shift?
Oh, I mean, I don't know if I should be saying this on recording. If you pause the recording, I'm happy to tell you. I don't know if I'm serious. I can't say it. Like, I just can't. I'm happy to talk to you about it.
I'll go into a kind of heavy hitting question here, and you can tell me if you feel comfortable answering it or not. Some of the recent stuff I've been seeing you do, like on your stories and the program that you're selling and the coaching package that you've got, something stood out to me, and it was the cure to ADHD. And I think obviously we can both agree that there's no one cure to ADHD. And I'm sure that it was like hyperbolic to try to attract people to learn about the tools that will end up managing their ADHD. But I do want to talk about, you know, this balance between gaining traction from engaging hooks versus the clickbaiting information that might be misleading. And so I'm curious what you think is reasonable to get people's attention online for your business and your offerings with how you do it.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really valid point. And I think some people are probably going to see, for example, that example specifically that you made in like a negative, and it's like an FU kind of light. But at the end of the day, like it's all marketing, and the deeper message behind it is, you know, learn how to manage yourself and be in control of yourself a lot better. And, you know, the marketing industry and the way that it's set out, like, is about getting attention. And unfortunately, sometimes you've got to say things in a way to get the attention so you can actually truly help people, because humans are very odd creatures. Like, they're not going to listen to plain boring bullshit all the time. So you got to find a way to shift their attention, because there's just so much going on. So that was the reason that I do go down those kind of clickbaity, but I do also speak the truth. So
So how do you balance that between speaking the truth and clickbaiting? Because for me as a creator in the background, is the fear I would have is that I would be leading someone to believe that I've got like the magic ADHD drug that cures it. So what's the balance, do you think?
The balance between posting like clickbait titles and like being really like specific and dead on. I think the balance is just having good intentions behind what you're actually doing. I think if you're coming at the angle like with a good soul and a good heart and good intentions, then it's okay. But if you're coming across in like that, like greedy, kind of like sinful manner, then I don't think that you would have a good balance there. So I think the good balance just comes down to like the own personal intentions. Yeah,
I actually really love that answer, because I think a lot of the times when we see like the clickbaity type stuff from companies in particular, it's like, here, I'm going to sell this vitamin or whatever, and it's the cure to ADHD. And in those terms, it's like, okay, the intention is you want people's money. But I can see that you have built like a program and coaching, and you're generally like looking to help people. And I think something that you do a very good job at is holding men accountable, especially in your advice when it comes to like relationships. You're not doing like the classic alpha male, like women suck, men rule, and that be the content. You instead really talk about like relationships and taking responsibility. And you recently I've noticed a lot of relationship content on your feed. I'm curious as to what responses you've received from that, and like how people are engaging with the relationship side of men's wellness.
Well, it's quite interesting because a lot of when I was doing, a lot of the ADHD content, my this was my old offer. I still do this to a degree, but my old offer was, coaching people with ADHD or just pretty much men specifically with ADHD to quit sabotaging their relationships. And I know that a lot of people that have, that low self-worth, and I noticed how much, because I actually didn't see anybody else in the ADHD creator space doing this offer. So it worked really, really well for me, and it allowed me to grow the business well. But at the same time, I realized like how many people struggle with self-sabotage. Like it's actually insane. Like you would not believe, like I have like 4,000 plus message requests on TikTok. Like I had thousands of people messaging me, and I had 12-year-old kids that are booking in my calendar, telling me they self-sabotage. And it's kind of like, I'm wondering what's going on, because there's so many young people doing it. There's so many old people, and it's because they haven't had the guidance, they haven't learned how to develop their brain, how to be in tune with themselves, and especially men, because women are more emotional creatures, being the divine feminine, and men don't really have that side as much because they can't hold themselves to a standard, and then they can't hold a relationship, and then etc. So it's a really vicious cycle, and I'm guilty of this too. Like I'm not perfect. No, I still do things at times where I'll sabotage or I'll snap and do things. I think that all humans to a degree do this, depending on how healed you are. It takes a lot of showing up every day and doing the inner work and being consciously aware. And unfortunately, the hardest part about coaching people to do this is because they don't want to show up and do the work, because it is very difficult. I can't lie when I say it's been challenging at times in business coaching people, because I can show up for them and say, here's the 50, here's what you got to do, but they have to show up, right? And they have to put in the work. And because they don't want to do the deep inner work that's absolutely grueling, it makes it hard for people. So people are constantly coming to me about the relationship advice and self-sabotage. I tell them what to do. I've sent them free ebooks. I've got paid ebooks. I'll coach them, but then they just don't listen, because it's just so hard. And I've found that that's probably the number one pain point for people about relationships with ADHD.
Yeah, I, as a coach as well, can totally relate to that. And I'm actually hearing it a lot on the women's side too.
Of course.
And a lot of it comes down to, again, that healing aspect that you've talked about, is that a lot of people are just, they haven't done the work on themselves, but expect the results. And so I can totally agree that it is very hard for people to just come in and like admit, like, no, I have to do the shit that sucks to get better. So I very much can relate to that. I will say you recently posted a video about specifically about this idea that like men need to stop playing the victim or blaming their parents or blaming their ex-partner, and that they need to like deal with it or, whatever. And I'm curious on your just personal opinion on like, when can a man say that it isn't his fault? Like when can the learned behaviors actually be them as a victim versus, showing up as a victim?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think if I was to pinpoint a specific age, for example, I'd be super biased towards it. But I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is like, there's so many variables to answer that question. And I think that even putting a specific answer on it is a little bit unjust. But from my opinion, and to try and answer it, I would say that once you're consciously aware enough about the patterns and you're not like living on autopilot and you aren't aware of their behaviors. And I would think that like, honestly, from the age of like 18 plus, like I'm not saying that a man should be a victim from freaking say the ages of 10 to 16, but those ages, like your brain still really isn't at the bulbs, your prefrontal cortex hasn't come in, you don't have that awareness of the world and stuff. So I think that for younger men, it's a lot harder. But I still think they should take accountability where they can. It's just a lot more difficult for the younger people to do that because they aren't aware of their patterns. They aren't aware about traumas. They don't have the education. So I think that there's a lack of education around that. And I noticed that a lot of people weren't talking about that in the ADHD space, which is why I just decided to do it. So I think there's a fine line between like younger people and older people, like, I'm going to be real. If you're like over the age of 25 and you're not acknowledging it, like you should be, like, you can't be playing victim at that age. I think that you're fully developed as a human being. You should know what's going on by now. If you don't want to take responsibility, you're just digging your own grave. Yeah.
And so when you say taking responsibility, you mean like that person should be doing the hard work on themselves rather than just sitting back and being like, this is my circumstance?
I think so. But again, like, people don't know where to start with the hard work. But I think at the end of the day, like, I think truly people know. They know in their soul. I just don't think they want to admit it. And you know, looking back on it now after having gone through the last 4 years of my own personal growth and healing journey, like, deep down back then, like, I knew. It's just a lot of people hang around, for example, the self-sabotage or whatever. They're not willing to call the people out on their abuse because people are scared and they don't want to feel like they're hurting someone. So it's hard because the good people and the really kind-hearted people, they don't want to say anything because they're so kind. And so it can be hard for the people that are doing those causing damage to relationships to get the help because they're not being called out on it. Right.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. And it's interesting because that doesn't come across in the video. So it's so interesting to like talk to you now about it and hear your real, like, the decisions behind it. And I will say on my side of coaching, when I have people, I'll tell you, like, when I have people coming into my space and they're saying, here are all the things that have happened to me and have made me the way that I am now, and like are stuck in that space, I find one of the largest parts of that healing is not taking accountability and instead saying, I don't have to carry that anymore because it wasn't me. I wasn't the person putting abuse into my life. I wasn't choosing a lot of these things. You know, I didn't want to have abusive parents that, you know, undermined what I was going through. And so a lot of like the healing that I watch happen is when people are able to be like, it's not my fault. Now all I can do is move forward and do the rest of the healing work and stuff.
Yeah, that is something that I agree with. If you constantly have an attachment to the past, but if you're still inhibiting those behaviors, take responsibility. But you should never take responsibility. If someone abused you as a freaking child, like, that's not your fault. Obviously, it's carrying the burden around that causes the unintentional infliction and damage on people that they don't realize. So once they bring it to the surface and realize, hey, this is what's going on, and I haven't dealt with this, but people don't want to deal with it because it's hard. But everything in life is hard. It's not meant to be easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is so much easier to be avoidant than it is to, you know, take things head on. So I totally agree. I absolutely agree. And I do want to say too, like, I admire you in this space because there are not a lot of like men supporting men in productive ways. There are a lot of like men being like, I'm the biggest and most alpha, so you got to listen to me. And so it is nice having someone that is not showing up in that way and kind of like, you know, pushing people to think about themselves and their situations. So another question I wanted to ask you, because we talked about, you know, the fact that having a male role model is really important for other men, which I totally agree with. While it is also important to have female role models, whatever. But what are the important aspects of someone to look for in a role model?
Or like the characteristics or traits that someone should hold. I would say that the first thing that comes to my mind is to be a man of your word. And, you know, for me, like, I've broken my word a lot of times in my life. And there's times where I still sometimes don't stick to what I say. And, it just happens. You get caught in those weak moments. But I think that being a man of honor or a woman of honor, like whatever gender it is, you should stick by your word, because this is what I've always said. Your work colleague might not know that you didn't go to the gym, but you do. And you lie down at night knowing that you lied to yourself. And every time that you break your word, you keep cutting into your psyche, and it just gets so deep that you literally can't trust yourself. And then it happens as like, you can't even trust anyone else. And it becomes this really big cycle. So if you just never, ever lie to yourself and, you keep yourself close to God and source, I think that you'll really, really benefit, because you keep breaking your word. Like, you can't even, how can you expect someone else to believe you, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I can get philosophical here if we wanted to, which is this idea of like, keeping to your word, but does the word matter when it comes up with how you're showing up in the world, right?
Yeah.
Because someone can be like, hey, my word is that I'm going to show up every day and I'm going to be horrible online, and they can do that thing, but does that make them a good role model? I think we both agree, no. So what is it about what they're preaching or saying that you think is important to be listened to or heard?
Oh, okay. Well, let's just talk in the context of men here specifically.
Yeah.
I think that just being able to, we talked about it earlier, but being able to show up and authentically not only be yourself, but know who you are. And don't get me wrong, like, you know, if you're talking about the word and not breaking it, there is going to be times, you know, where you slip up, because I don't think everyone's perfect. I think that if you can show up at least like 90% of the time and practice that, because if you can do that, that means others are going to be aligned with you, and they're going to receive that energy. So they're going to know, and they're going to feel the pull towards you and know that it's like, oh, this guy, like, he is legit. You can just feel it when they're showing up, and in turn, you're able to help other people show up because you are. But if you're kind of like lying to yourself in real life, and then, for example, you're trying to show up online and help men or help women, like, they can literally feel that energy through the phone. I never used to believe it, but it is absolutely 100% true.
Yeah. And I think it's important for everyone to have role models, especially online, when we are just like,
yeah,
in this content machine of just seeing everything, and so many people not living authentically. So to see people online that are actually showing their truest self is, I think, really valuable.
I will say one thing though. I will say one thing. I think the hardest part about, and I think you might resonate with this, Hayley, I think the hardest part about being like a coach and you know, you run a company or whatever it is, because it's a highlight reel, you don't want to always show your low moments, because it's like, oh, well, if she's going through this, like, are people then going to want to work with me? And I have really struggled with that, because it's like, are you running a business here? Are you trying to be professional? But at the same time, you want to show the bad side because it's been authentic. But then it's like, is this going to damage my rep? And so you jump between these questions. And to be honest, it's funny. I actually was making the most money back when I was showing the negative parts of my life. And I think once my brand really took up and I wanted to have more authority in the company and work with all the people who would trust me and pay me more and stuff, I stopped doing that. And sometimes I wonder if that's the wrong decision. What do you think about that?
Great question. I frequently, I think one of the things that I most frequently get praised for is the fact that I will show up in my worst state online,
you
all the time.
I agree. I see that.
Yeah. And the reason I do that is because I think of anything I can show to people, the most valuable thing I can do is to show that I'm a human. Because so frequently online, we are told that we're supposed to be perfect or like in that highlight reel. But when I show up as like Hayley in the hardest moments of my life, that is the moment that most people feel connected to me and feel as though like, oh my God, I'm not alone. And, you know, there's hope for me because look, she's going through it, but she's made it through it. And I'm constantly proving to people that they can, you know, get through the hardest bits and they can keep pushing forward and they can be successful, which is like hard to believe a lot of the times. And whenever I get onto coaching calls, everyone always says that. They're like, oh my God, like you made me feel like I wasn't alone, or that this challenge wasn't just about me. And so for myself, I think that is probably one of the most valuable parts of being an online presence, is just like, here's the shit, and here's how I deal with it, and here's how you could deal with it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really valuable for anyone that's going to see that too.
Yeah, definitely. Which is funny because in the past, when I first started making content online, like right at the very start, the people that were in my life used to say like, why are you showing up as crying online? Like, why would you do that? That's so weird. And blah, 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 blah. Those people aren't in my life anymore. Right. And it really helped actually to like showcase the people that were a positive effect versus like pulling me down.
Yeah.
Okay. I have one last question for you.
All right, let's go.
If you had just one piece of advice to give specifically to men, being that that's your audience, with ADHD, what would it be?
I would say, and talking about like being in a relationship space, at least, I would say work on yourself first and invest in yourself. I think that It's because people don't understand how things work, right? And you can only say so much to a certain degree. But I think invest in your own personal development first, because like your brain, no one can, unless the CIA develops some crazy mind tools, which I'm sure they will. But no one can like go in your brain and just pluck out the wisdom and knowledge that you've absorbed. And especially if you're up to date. And I think that if you can invest your money into your own personal knowledge, like you're going to get a return on investment. Everyone looks at their personal growth and their development for some reason like an expense, and I think that's just being conditioned, which is really disappointing because they don't realize how valuable it is, and a lot of people miss out. I used to spend $500 a week on that's Australian dollars on my mentor to teach me, the inner work and stuff. And it's like, people aren't even willing to spend like $50 a week. And I was spending 10x that. It's just like, there really needs to be a mindset shift, I think. And so I think the best piece of advice I can say is work on yourself and invest the money into yourself. You don't need to be buying all of this crap. You don't need to be sucked into the consumerism conveyor belt, because it doesn't matter. Like, I've had nights where I've gone out and spent $2,000 and then it was just an empty void. I've done it. And again, I think people have to, unfortunately, go through that experience to know. Humans have to learn the hard way. That's how we are. And so a lot of people, they don't get to that level where they can learn. And so it's very, very difficult to shape them and mold them. And I think, and this is a really important thing. And this is why, like, in the coaching space, people have to charge exorbitant amounts of money, because at the end of the day, people aren't going to do the work on $100, because it's not enough of a sting. It's not enough of a pain point. And I've noticed this with a lot of men. I've had men who will pay me $5,000, and then men who pay me $1,000. And guess who showed up more? The men who paid me $5,000. And I think that's where it's very difficult, and you've got to really help get people across the line to help them. And unfortunately, this is the way that it's designed, and we don't want it to be like that. Heck, I would love to always be charging $500 for people, but unfortunately, they just don't do the work because they don't understand the return on investment. Have you faced this in your coaching? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, and I am definitely a lower charging coach. And I do that for the purpose of like trying to just start contact with as many people as possible. And like, my goal that I'm working towards is building a business of coaches that are sufficient by themselves. And so for me, like, I'm at a much lower rate. But it is kind of, for me, a challenge in the like imposter syndrome of like, am I worth more than this? Like, is my time more valuable than this amount? And it's something I've battled with, but I do think at the end of the day, the people that are paying, like, I do my programs for a minimum of a month, and like the people that do pay for that month, they will show up because it's like they've put significant money into it and are ready to, do the work. And, that's why I don't do like the one-off sessions, because I'm like, there's no way you're going to like show up and really take what I'm saying. If you're doing this every single week, though, it's going to be more valuable. And so there's always strategy around it and whatnot. But yeah, I can totally hear what you're saying. I completely lied to you. There is another question I had.
Okay. Yeah.
You, sir, have used a word in our DMs that has got me interested. The Matrix. And I am curious what you're willing to talk about or say in that terms, because I haven't heard anyone say that like out, like really? Anywhere in the space that I'm in right now. And so I was just like, piqued my interest. I want to know more. And I want to hear like, what is the thought behind that?
You've never heard anyone say that in the space?
No, not in the creator space. Like I think we're in a different, like what we're consuming. And so I don't hear that in my space.
Well, the Matrix is just the enslavement tool that's been pulled over our eyes. So I like to look at it in a couple of different ways. You can look at it from the artificial world that's been placed on top of us over the natural world, and thinking that like all of this stuff matters, that you need to buy into the consumerism. The Matrix is really everything. It's the tap water that's poisoning us. It's the food and the pesticides. It's the fluoride in the toothpaste. It's everywhere. It's basically everything that is slowly killing humans by the people that are at the top, because they just want to damage everyone. They don't want everyone to be coming from a place of love, accessing their 5D, their higher self. They want to keep everyone on a low frequency and in a state of fear and not being able to be them true selves, which means they can take back their power and level up, and then they can help other people. And then we can actually restore peace in humanity. And the matrix is essentially everything that keeps people in a lower vibration. And the tech is really one of the worst things for it. You get sucked into the void of scrolling, and it just lowers your vibration so much, and it puts your brain waves on such a low frequency that you can become like a narcissist. You can become abusive, and you don't realize it. And at the end of the day, the reason that people do this is because they're scared of the reality and this plane of existence that we live in. And we can get into as deep as that as you want. But that's really ultimately what it is. It's the enslavement of people working jobs for $18 an hour, and they can't get ahead in life, and they're scraping by, and they're living in a state of non-abundance and love. That's pretty much what it is. But there's a lot more to it than that, obviously.
Yeah. And I think there are parts of that I definitely am like, oh, that aligns with what I think. So like, I think part of the matrix belief system that I'm hearing from you is that it's kind of a scary thing to even be open-minded about, because it's like, that's such a massive conspiracy when you think about it. And for like me, I don't imagine that there's like a group of people in a room being like, here are all the things we're going to do to enslave people. And it's probably more a product of like, history and how things have gone. But specifically that comment about like technology and what that is doing to our brains right now, fuck, dude, like that, I agree. Like I'm going through a dopamine detox right now, which is like the first time in my life I am putting screens aside and not like allowing it to control my life.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Like, it's insane. It is just the craziest shift in the world. And so I'm curious, like, is there anything that you put in place in your life to try to avoid that kind of like, control that comes from technology?
I think I've just elevated to such a mindset where like, it's not even fun anymore to scroll. Like, I don't even get dopamine from scrolling. Like, I'm at the point where I literally like, I don't even get dopamine. And I'm not gonna lie, it takes a very long time to elevate yourself to this mindset. Like, it takes years of reconditioning and programming. Like, it's taken me 4 years. I really don't even sit and scroll my phone. Like, if I'm working, like, I'm putting out content or editing, and if not, like, I'm just being at peace with my time that's left on this planet. And I think that most people, they're just not willing to do that, because it's like terrifying, because it's like, oh, what's going on? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And people just rather escape, because it's just easier to escape. Yeah. It is so easy to pick it up, and they're just not living in the same reality. And I think that, to be honest, not everyone deserves is probably the wrong word, but like, should be unplugged and should be living in the reality where they're not being consumed, because it's very hard to handle. And every day, like, honestly, every day is actually such a battle, knowing that it's like, it's just this continuous cycle of doing the same thing and trying to escape this and like fix this. And it's just like, it's such a battle. So it's easier to just scroll,
Yeah. Feels very reminiscent of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave. If you're not, I would definitely suggest reading it. It's a very interesting idea, but it does feel very much like a lot of people are blinded, and a lot of people will choose to never, look around and actually see what's going on. So, really cool perspective. And I appreciate you being like open and honest and talking your truth and being here. And I very much have enjoyed talking with you.
It's been good.
Yeah. And so the last little bit, where can people find you? Plug yourself, tell the people what you're doing.
You can find me at that ADHD guy pretty much everywhere. I am updating my handle to that masculine guy, because I'm, helping, men reclaim their masculinity. So I am going to be changing my handle, but for now it is still that ADHD guy pretty much everywhere, until I can transition and change my username. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
Cool.